The wind howled through the empty streets as the limousine came to a sudden stop. Donald Trump stepped out into the biting cold, his attention drawn to a forgotten corner of the city. Beyond the glimmering skyline, there was a stretch of land that seemed frozen in time, a junkyard of discarded furniture, broken appliances, rusted metal, and the remnants of lives once lived. The scene was a far cry from the polished, luxurious environments Trump was used to. Yet, something about this place, something about it, called to him. But it wasn't the decaying lot that caught his eye. It was the man. Hunched over, sorting through piles of trash with care, the man moved as if he were looking for more than just scraps. His clothes were torn and filthy, his skin weathered by time and hardship. His face, though etched with age and struggle, held a quiet dignity, as if the world had long since forgotten him, but he still remembered who he once was. The man's movements were deliberate, controlled, not the frantic energy of someone fighting to survive, but the calm precision of someone who had made peace with his situation long ago. There was a certain resoluteness in his posture that made Trump stop, curiosity taking over. This wasn't just any homeless man. There was a story here, one still unfolding amidst the ruins of broken lives and lost dreams. Without a second thought, Trump stepped out of the limousine. Ignoring the concerned calls of his security detail, his footsteps echoed softly on the cracked pavement as he approached the man, each step taking him further away from the world he knew. The man didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in his task. But when Trump spoke, the figure stiffened, slowly turning to face the voice. The eyes that met Trump's were tired, but there was something in them, something that spoke of battles fought, dreams lost and found, of a life lived with purpose, even if that purpose had long since been forgotten by the world. Trump had seen that look before, in the eyes of soldiers returning from war, discarded and unappreciated. "Do I know you?" the man asked, his voice rough, worn from years of silence. Trump studied him carefully. The face wasn't familiar, but the intensity in the man's gaze was unmistakable. There was something in the way he carried himself, something that reminded Trump of the veterans he'd met over the years, men and women who had given everything for their country, only to come home and be forgotten. "Maybe not personally," Trump said slowly, his voice softening with empathy, "but you look like someone who's been through a lot." The man let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "You have no idea. No one does." Trump stood a little taller, feeling a surge of determination. This wasn't just another encounter. This felt personal. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, but firmly. The man hesitated, as if the question itself was an intrusion into a life he'd shut off from the world. But finally, he spoke. "Richard Evans, former U.S. Marine." The words hit Trump hard. A Marine, a man who'd fought for his country only to return home to nothing, nothing but the wreckage of a life destroyed and forgotten. Trump's heart tightened. "What happened, Richard?" he asked softly, his voice carrying the weight of sincere curiosity. Richard let out a deep breath, as if the weight of his memories was too much to bear alone. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, but his voice was steady, the story pouring out with a mix of sorrow and regret. "I fought overseas. I gave everything, came back home, thinking I could start over. I had dreams, plans. But then," his voice broke as he gestured around them. "A fire. My house. My wife. My daughter." He swallowed hard, his throat tight with the grief he still carried. "I lost everything. Everything that mattered." Trump's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a homeless man. This was a man whose entire world had been torn apart. A man who had served with honor, only to come home and be cast aside. "That's not where your story ends," Trump said firmly, his voice strong. "This isn't where you belong." Richard looked up at him, a hard laugh escaping his lips. "Tell that to the world. No one cares about a washed-up soldier." Trump's gaze didn't waver. "I care." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time in years, Richard felt the impact of those words, felt someone truly care, not out of pity, but out of respect. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time, and it broke through the walls he had built around himself. No one had said that to him before, not in years. It wasn't just help being offered, it was recognition. Without thinking, Trump extended his hand. "Come with me." Richard recoiled, shaking his head, as if the very idea of accepting help was foreign to him. "I don't need charity." Trump's eyes were steady. "This isn't charity, it's justice." Richard stood there for a moment, caught between the man who offered him a lifeline and the man who had been abandoned by the world. But something in Trump's eyes, something in the certainty of his words, finally broke through. He took a breath, the emotion thick in the air, and after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. The next few days felt like a dream. Trump didn't just offer help. He gave Richard a chance at redemption, a chance to rebuild the life he thought was lost forever. Medical care, a safe place to live, the promise of a future not defined by shadows. Trump made sure Richard received not just assistance, but the tools to reclaim his dignity and self-worth. But it wasn't just material things that Trump provided. It was something deeper: hope. Richard had lived in darkness for so long that the light seemed foreign to him. But with each day that passed, as he healed physically and mentally, the man who had once felt invisible began to see a future he hadn't dared dream about in years. It wasn't perfect. There were days of doubt and setbacks, but with Trump's unwavering support, Richard started to understand something he had long forgotten: that he mattered. As the weeks passed, Richard started to make progress. He found himself walking with a newfound purpose. He wasn't just existing anymore, he was living. He had learned how to smile again, how to engage with others, how to trust. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. The community around him, once distant and indifferent, started to notice the changes in him. He began to volunteer at local shelters, helping others who were in the same position he had once been. He wanted to give back, to show the world that he was no longer a man defined by his past, but by his actions. The media caught wind of the story, and it spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Donald Trump lifts forgotten war, hero from the shadows," and "Veteran gets a new lease on life, thanks to Trump." Richard's name, once just another faceless man in the streets, was now known across the nation. He was no longer just another broken soul sifting through trash. He was a man given a second chance. Months later, Richard stood tall at a veterans event, wearing a sharp suit that fit him perfectly. The once broken man, who had been discarded by society, now stood proud, shoulders squared, heart full of purpose. He had found his way again, not through charity, but through being recognized as a human being. Trump stood beside him, a proud smile on his face. He clapped Richard on the back, the words carrying deep meaning. "Welcome home, Marine," Trump said. The simplicity of the words hit Richard with a profound impact. They weren't just a greeting, they were a recognition of his pain, his sacrifice. His heart swelled, and tears welled up as he looked at the man who had given him the chance to rebuild his life. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Thank you. I never thought I'd hear those words again." For the first time in years, Richard truly understood what it meant to be home. He wasn't just a forgotten veteran anymore. He was a man who had been given a second chance. It wasn't about the clothes or the applause, but the deeper recognition of his worth, his dignity. In that moment, the heavy weight of his past began to lift. The crowd erupted into applause, but Richard didn't hear it. He was lost in the overwhelming sense of peace that filled his heart. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. As Trump watched Richard, now a symbol of hope, he knew this moment would be one of the most powerful he'd ever witness. It wasn't a political victory, but a reminder that the greatest achievements are the ones that restore humanity and give hope. Richard, standing proud, realized this wasn't just a new beginning for him. It was for anyone who had ever felt forgotten. His story would inspire others who thought their past would define them. And for Richard, this new chapter would be carried forward with strength. As Trump watched, a quiet pride settled in his heart. He had always believed in second chances, in lifting those who had been forgotten. And now, seeing Richard stand tall, he knew this was one of those defining moments. The applause wasn't just for Richard. It was for every soldier who had ever been cast aside, for every person who had fought their way back from the brink. This was more than recognition. It was a moment of transformation, a moment of healing. And as Trump looked at the veteran before him, he knew that neither of them would ever forget this day.